No. Okay, just a couple of housekeeping things for anybody who got on late. Next week, Scott and I will not be here. Scott's going to record something this week, not from this study, but something separate, and we will resume the study of John the Sunday after that. So that's one thing.
That'll be what, the 22nd?
No, it will be the 29th.
Isn't this the 15th?
Anyhow, don't.
Well, I just want to be
14th.
sure,
It'll be
because somebody
29th.
may watch this at a different time. and
Oh,
not
okay,
know.
it'll be the 29th.
Okay.
Okay. Second of all, this list that I'm putting together, it's a work in progress. I send it out to everybody. And I know some of you have told me in different ways they want to be added to the list, but I either couldn't find the emails and I didn't want to do it, and if you put it in the chat, once the chat is done, I can't read it. So if you got an email that has people's addresses in it, and if you want to be added to the list, please write back on that email. That would be really helpful. And one other thing, what is the way you'd like to communicate? So this is, the purpose of this, people have requested, if someone's in prayer, or if we're praying for someone, or just a wish, if they want to contact someone, how could they do it? So that is.
And not
what those-
everybody wants to be, so we decided to do it this way, so that those who don't,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, so that is that. So we are studying the Gospel of John.
Okay, hold on a second
Yes.
before you start, because Mary's going to talk about background on John himself and about the book. But I want to start with this because it's important. You know, I like Luke. When we study Luke, the very beginning of it, Luke says that therefore, having investigated everything from the beginning, it seemed good also to write an orderly account. And this is where Luke says he wrote that so that you may know the certainty of the things you've been taught. Luke starts right out saying, this is why I'm writing this, so that the reader, so that you may know the certainty of the things you've been taught.
And that was in Luke 1, verse 4.
Luke 1, verse 4. You skip to John, and very near the end, it's in the 20th chapter, not the last one, but John says something, and I want, as we do this study, for you to keep this in mind. A lot of commentaries, a lot of things get said about John, but I want you to hear what John himself says about what he wrote and why. In John 20, starting at verse 30, the last two verses, he says, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So when a person goes to the trouble of telling you, this is why I've written this, this is the whole purpose in this whole gospel, that what we call a gospel, it's important for us to keep that in front of us the whole time we study. Some of you have read commentaries on John, and it is one of the most abused books in the Bible. They come up with some of the most amazing things. The thing we want to remember, if it doesn't go towards his purpose, which was to tell you so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. If people are telling you, oh, well, this is in here and that's in here, if it doesn't go towards that purpose, there's a good chance that John didn't really have all these alternate meanings. He says, I'm writing it for this purpose. Let's keep that in mind as we study.
So as you know, there's 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And some of the things that we're going to go over, they're generally accepted. Do we know they are for sure? A lot of it we don't have for sure, but there are some things were generally accepted. So it is believed that John was the last gospel that was written. So who was John in the first place? John was one, it is generally believed, you can always find someone who will disagree with it, but it's generally believed that John was one of the 12 disciples, and that he was the youngest of the 12 disciples. He you know, if you Google, it says he was probably born in 6 AD. We know he was born in Bethsaida,
Bethsaida, yeah, Bethsaida.
Saida, which is in the Galilee, north of the Sea of Galilee. And that, we know he had a brother. It was James and John. When you listen to the stories about the disciples, they were the sons of Zebedee. They were the sons of thunder. And why were they called that?
Well, in particular, there's one time where some people were, you know, they were mean to Jesus, and James and John said, "Do you want us to call down lightning from heaven and have them basically burned to a crisp?" You know, they've gotten kind of caught up in this ability, you know, to do signs and wonders, and they had Jesus back. They were gonna have these people French fried for being mean to him, and he actually, they're called the sons of thunder. They were a little emotional.
They were fishermen. I was telling Scott the other day, when I think back of, you know, what I thought about the disciples, if someone asked me, so what was the disciples' career? And I would have said, all but Matthew was a tax collector, but all the rest of them were fishermen. Well, that wasn't true. We know that 4 of them were fishermen, Peter and Andrew and James and John. And
Charlie, you can understand why the most important of the bunch were fishermen, right?
And that's the other thing. When people talk about Jesus's inner circle, even more inner than just the 12, they usually say that Jesus's closest disciples were Peter, John, and James. Okay, so they were 3 fishermen, as Scott said, 2 of them brothers, and then Peter. John, like I said, was the youngest. They believe he was born in 6 AD. Many people believe he died someplace between 95 and 100 AD. He died in Ephesus. Ephesus is in, well, that's debated. He either died in Ephesus or in Patmos. Ephesus is in Turkey, present-day Turkey. Patmos is a island off the coast of Greece. It's part of Greece. It is generally accepted that John wrote Revelations, and he wrote it at Patmos, and that was the last thing he wrote before he died. They believe that the Gospel of John was written someplace between the years 85 and 95 AD. So Mark they believe, was the first gospel written, probably 55, 59. Matthew was second, 60 to 65. Luke, 65, and John, 85, 95. Scott hates when I do these numbers. But I just like to give people some sort of overall thought about it. You know, and how did John die? Big questions. You can Google it. Some people say that he was the only disciple that died of natural causes. I mean, he was in his late 90s when he died. Other people say that he was boiled in oil. Other people said he was boiled in oil and lived through it, and, you know, so there's a whole bunch of things, but he was 95, okay?
They can't all be true.
That's what he tells me.
So one thing I want to kind of mention about John is we have that account that at the crucifixion, Jesus is, you know, his time is almost upon him, and he looks down at John, and John is there and Mary is there, and he tells John, "Behold your mother." And he tells Mary, "Woman, behold your son." So he leaves Mary in the care of this man, the man who wrote this. And he said, obviously, he's like a brother because he went to the trouble of saying to his mother, "This is now your son." And he trusted John enough to say, "This is now your mother, and take good care of her."
And John describes himself as the most loved.
Yeah, the disciple that Jesus loved. They were close. They were like brothers. So that's all we got.
Well,
And I read a quick one about they may have been cousins through the marital mom chain.
It's possible, and within that society we talk about cousins, and it doesn't always necessarily mean your mother's sibling child, but yeah, you're right, and there's a good possibility from some of the accounts that they were in fact related. Yeah.
So there's 4 Gospels, 3 of them. Do you want to talk in general
3,
about them?
Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they call synoptic. And the syn is like S-Y-N, it's like synthesis, something that is together. And optic, of course, means to look. So the 3 look a lot alike. The synoptic gospels, and that's all it means, is that they appear very similar to each other. And then there's John, and John is different. But maybe, the relationship that they had, John's is different appearing than the other 3.
Some people call it the spiritual gospel.
Yeah, I'm not touching that.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to start with John, and I'm going to go back. I'm going to start with John 1:1, but before I do that, I'm just going to read John 1, verse 14.
Okay.
And that is, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us.
So the other thing I told you, we skipped to the end, and he says, there are a lot of signs and miracles, but I've told you these so that you would believe, and by believing, have this eternal life. John tells us what he's doing. And there's this beginning, people, it can be confusing. It shouldn't be. But this is John's story about Jesus. Nothing more or less. Keep that up front as well. And a lot of this stuff it'll be very, very clear as long as you understand this is John's account of Jesus, his life, and his mission. And because it uses some terms that people are not familiar with, but it says the Word, and we'll deal with that, became flesh. Jesus came from the Father, he told people that constantly, and became flesh for us. If you keep that in mind, a lot of the controversy of John goes away.
I'm going to start with John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made, and without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.
The beginning of this is beautiful. It's something that just almost can bring tears to your eyes if you understand what everything that John packed in. But it starts out in the beginning, and that is clearly a reference to Genesis. There's no doubt. A lot of other things get said, but when he starts in the beginning, and our Old Testament starts out in the beginning, that's not an accident. They're intimately familiar. The other Gospels start out with, what led up to Jesus' birth, or, I guess Mark starts kind of right in the middle, but they're showing the life of Jesus as a man on this earth. John
And the ancestry.
Okay. To show that this was his lineage just as prophesied. But John goes rather further back than that. John starts out in the beginning. And he says, in the beginning was the Word. And this, unfortunately, hangs up. Theologians love to come up with something new and exciting. And they just take this little thing and beat it to death. If you read it in the Greek, it says, in the beginning was the Logos, or Logos. But this Logos is a concept that the Greeks have as they began to look at the world and form their philosophies. They began to notice this place is really good, and it works really, really well, and things just seem to fall together, especially good. And they became convinced that there has to be something that ties everything together, that makes it all make sense, that explains how things fit together the way they do. And that's their philosophy And John is writing this in Greek. Now, he says we have in our translations was the Word. But in Greek, there's another word, rhema, R-H-E-M-A, that just means your average everyday word, right? There's no way John picks the wrong word. It's one thing if someone translates and they do the best they can. But when you're a native speaker, I told Mary this week, it's like the difference between man and boy. They're both male human beings. But you don't select boy when you're talking about a man by accident. You don't carelessly call someone a boy because you understand the difference, right? Well, the difference between rhema and logos, they're worlds apart. Logos is this idea that the Greeks have that there's something that this logic. By the way, logos is where we get logic. It's where we get biology, the logos at the end of ology, geology. It is the logic of all of these things that we see in the world around us. That's logos. Now, we express these things in words. And so when they say word, logos as word, it really is more like a plan. It's really more like the logic. And we speak it, but it's not saying that God spoke the world into existence. Maybe he did. We don't know. We wouldn't understand what happened no matter what. I don't think God has vocal cords, so even if it has to do with the plan, the intent, the perfection. And he's telling these people who are Greek, you're right. There is something that coalesces everything, and it was with God in the beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, people do all kinds of crazy stuff even with that. But then he goes on, and he says, as Mary read ahead, the Word, the Logos, became flesh. And from that, without any question, all of this other stuff that people do, throw it away. He's talking about Jesus. He's talking about Christ, the Messiah. And there's a point where Jesus is talking to people, and he mentioned something about Abraham, and they got all upset. And he said, I'll tell you the truth. Before Abraham was even born, I am. He didn't say I was. He didn't say I existed before even Abraham was born. He goes further than that. He says, before Abraham was born, I am. Now, in the Hebrew, you don't use that first person am except when talking about God. That was an enormous proclamation by Jesus that I am says that I am. It says just what John says. The Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. And to try and understand what this idea of being different and yet one, we have to just
Above
sort
your
of...
pay grade?
Yeah, it's above my pay grade, and if you've got an answer, send it to me.
I don't have an answer, but in Genesis, is in Hebrew, right?
True.
In the beginning. What's the word for the beginning God created?
Oh, heck, I don't remember. I don't remember. But it is, I've actually looked into it, and it has that strong connotation that it's the beginning of everything. This is not, it is from, how do you understand eternity? How do you explain something that stretches back and never ends and stretches forward and never ends? I don't know how to even get my hands around it, but when it says in the beginning, it means at the beginning of everything, God was, and John says the Word, the Logos, it says that Jesus was, and he was with God, and he was God. I can tell you what John is saying. I can't give you a better explanation.
There came a man, I'm on verse 6. There came a man who was sent from God. His name was John. He came as a witness to testify about the light, so that through him everyone might believe. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify about the light. The true light, who gives light to every man, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to his own, and his own did not recognize him. But to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of blood, nor of desire or will of man, but born of God.
So I don't need to borrow this so I don't leave anything out.
Okay.
Let's go back to the very first part. And he says that he was in the beginning, and in him was life. And that, again, is a word that indicates more than, I mean, we have a hard time really defining life. But in him was life, and that life was the light of the world. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So for starters, I told you, he is referencing Genesis. And in Genesis, the first thing God does is say, let there be light. And so there's no doubt John is showing the parallel in this. And the idea that the light shines in the dark, that that life in him is the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And everyone knows that this Jesus he speaks of was crucified. And yet he says he shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And it's an important, it's an important thing to see what he's doing. There came a man who was sent from God, and this is John we call the Baptist or the baptizer. And he came to proclaim, and John says, be real careful, he was not the light. He was the one who was sent to sort of proclaim, to point us towards the light. Go ahead, Gene.
What is the point of that negative rebuttal? Because even John the Baptist says, I'm not the man that's coming. I'm just here to straighten out the road. And the God coming behind me is the light, the true Messiah. So why is this negative response?
And that's why I wanted to start with near the end where he says his purpose is to show you the things so that you may believe. So people may have heard about bits and pieces. John is saying, I was there. And some of this, he's going to deal with the fact that it was prophesied that there would be this one coming ahead. So it's weird because we always think of Paul as being the lawyer who lays out a case. But John is actually sort of laying this out logically for people. He just does it in a, he's got a different style of writing. But people are aware of John, and they know about the prophecy. And he's saying the guy came, and he wasn't the light, but he came to point to the light. The true light to every man was coming into the world. He wasn't the true light. The true light was coming into the world. He was in the world. And this is an interesting thing. If you go back up to the earlier verse, John has explained that everything that was ever made, everything that was ever created, Jesus being with God and being God had a part in it. That he's integral to this. And so then he says that he was in the world, and though the world was made through him, which is what he's just set up above, we come from him. Though the world was made through him, they didn't know him. And that's a fairly accurate, state of affairs. They didn't know him. It says he came to his own. We hear about the Jews being referred to as God's chosen people. They're God's people. And John refers to the Jews that he went to as Jesus' own. This is that indistinguishable quality between they're God's people, which means they were Jesus' people. And he went to them first, and they didn't receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believe in his name, he gave the right or the authority, he gave the opportunity to become children of God. So these people, it doesn't say, and this is where I don't ever get into the relationship between the Jews and God. Again, above my pay grade. He didn't say that they quit becoming children of God. I don't know how it all works. I don't have to. Because what he does say is to those who received him, who believed in his name, he gave the right or the opportunity to become children of God. Children born not of blood, nor the desire or will of man, but born of God. And we all understand that that's, it's not being born in the normal sense, being born of blood or born of the will of a man, but born of God. And it's just a summary of what, he's going to then go into a lot of things to show you and say, I saw these things, but he lays the story out very well in the first part of this book. And now Mary needs her Bible back.
And this is verse 14, which I'd started with, the Word, which we know that now he was talking about Jesus. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory and the glory of the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth.
Hold on just a second right there.
Okay.
So some of you may have seen this, some of you may see it, and some probably will never. But they do these commentaries about the Word. What I've now told you is logos. And they literally say that it is God's spoken word. And there are some who will tell you it means the Bible. It means our scriptures, which strangely were not around in the beginning. So I don't think it's talking about that since they weren't there in the beginning. They didn't come. We know they didn't come till much later. And John is very clear. And I'm only telling you this because if you read something or hear something in the future, a lot of this other stuff is a distraction. It is not John's intent. And the theologians just love to get in. And so they say that it's God's spoken word, and somehow the word became flesh, and none of it really just avoid that, because John is telling us what's going on here. John is not at all unclear about what's going on. And so what was it? There was one other thing that you said about the logos. We've seen his glory.
Yeah.
And again, that's completely talking about Jesus himself, the resurrection, the fact that he overcame this and made this sacrifice. We've seen his glory. This isn't talking about some weird thing about words and God speaking things into his existence. And, it's just his story about the Messiah, about Jesus, and him saying, I saw it with my own eyes.
There, a lot of the descriptions of John say it's written in a way that's is the easiest to understand. And I said to Scott this week, I went back to, I understand why you like Luke. I'm such a linear thinker. And to me, this is why I didn't like poems in English class. I was telling Scott, you read a poem and you think, wow, that, I really like that. And then you go to English class and they tell you 1,300 ways what it really means, and you're thinking, really? The author really meant all those things? And I know we have a number of artists on, and I've seen people do that in front of an artist and say, oh, you must have been saying, and then I hear the artist say, well, I really wasn't saying that. And this is a gospel that lends itself to this. And we read some of the craziest theological arguments that, because he starts with in the beginning, that then John, through this whole thing, is telling what the first 7 days of creation was like.
He's retelling creation, and they take miracles and say the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and then there's too many, so they have to say the sixth and the third are the same, and they do this stuff. That's just it's just not what was going on. And he's not writing at a bunch of different levels. He tells you, this is what I'm trying to convince you of, or I'm trying to allow you to see. Let's leave it at that.
A little sidetrack. This version of Berean Bible capitalizes the word "word,"
Ooh, yeah.
and that's written in Greek,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Is in the original, or in the Greek, is there a capitalization? I'm not just talking about this little word, I'm talking about the word.
Sometimes I forget things, and I was actually, I had intended to say that. Gene is awfully right where it says the word, and it, by the way, has the article the. the word, and the way it's used, it's very specific. But yes, logos is capitalized. And logos is not normally capitalized. It doesn't have to be. Yes, the logos, in the beginning was the logos. All these times it says word, it is capitalized in the original Greek. And I really worked hard on that. Yes, it is. And let me just be honest with you. One of the reasons people want to say that it's a spoken word, because this concept of logos, this Greek sort of philosophical idea of something that unites everything, John is,
I don't think it's me. It is me.
it is,
Sorry.
no, it's all right. John is saying, you're right, there is something. And I'm going to tell you who that logos is, because the concept that you have is answered in what I'm telling you. But there are people that are so afraid that this is some Greek philosophy that's been dumped into the Bible that they'll turn themselves in knots to try and avoid saying it is what it is. I mean, it's logos. And John knows what he's saying. He's talking to an audience that understands that. And he just says, from the very beginning of everything, this idea that you have is real, in that there is this thing that draws everything together, but it's a person. It is God incarnate, and he was there at the beginning. And to me, it's a beautiful thing. And he's explaining to people in terms that they can understand, and affirming, you've been seeing something in the world around you. You just didn't understand what it was. And I'm telling you, this is what it is that you're seeing.
You know, I'm reading this and I'm reading John, and we have which John is this? But I'm thinking of the fisherman.
Yes?
Right? Where did this John get this deep understanding, not only of the Old Testament, but of this philosophical thinking to incorporate the Greeks and counter? I mean, I can see Paul. In my little mind, I can see Paul. He's got the background. He's a student, da-da-da-da-da. John, I don't have that background about John himself.
Well, John's probably at this age, first of all, he's 75 years old.
When he's writing this, probably 75. They're taught as young people, most of them, not everybody, but most of them are taught at least up to the age of 12. But it does seem somewhat miraculous. We know they kept studying. We know that they kept reading scriptures. But also they seem to have become very articulate. But last week we talked about the gifts of the Spirit. And there's your another living embodiment of that, in that they do. We see it right after the resurrection at Pentecost. Suddenly these people are bold. They just 50 days before that, they
Peter
were
was
hiding.
around.
Yeah, Peter denies him, and they're hiding in an upper room, and suddenly they're bold, and they're speaking, and he's told them, you'll get the words that you need. Don't worry about preparing a speech. You'll get the words you need when the time is right. And I think that's your answer to it. I mean, I think it should be an example to all of us. They do become quite articulate. Yeah.
I read a commentary about this John,
Yeah.
one of the Johns, no pun intended, but he may have been educated. He may have been upper class. I mean, the high priest knew him, ba-ba-da-ba-da.
Here's where I'm going to go with that. And I'm not going to do this to everybody for more than just a couple of minutes. The commentaries on John are so far flung. Everybody wants to come up with something clever. Everybody wants to prove that they've thought of something. And so this idea, for instance, in the beginning is Genesis. So they say that what John does is parallel the days of creation. And the first one that tried that forgot that on the seventh day, God rested. And so he came up with 7 days worth of stuff. And then they had to come back and do apologetics for, well, the sixth and the third are actually the same, and on and on. There are commentaries about John. And this hopefully is, I'm not going to have to say much more of this, except that most of them are garbage. I mean, they're just people that are so in love with their own wisdom and their own ability to, and they just make stuff up. When Mary said that about the poem, that's one of the things that she hated, is that I used to just be intrigued in class when there would be 25 different interpretations, and they acted like the author was saying all of those things. Nobody writes at 25 different levels at the same time. They don't. What happens is people want to interject their own wisdom, their own, look at how wise I am. And the poem, the original poem, gets left behind and it becomes all about them. Well, that's what happens with the commentaries, is they remember what John says. I'm writing this so that you will believe, and by believing obtain eternal life. That's his goal. And somehow in all of these commentaries, that gets lost. And that's the one thing I don't want to allow to happen as we study this.
John 1, verse 19. And this was John's testimony when the Jews of Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to ask him, "Who are you?" He did not refuse to confess, but openly declared, "I am not the Christ." "Then who are you?" they inquired. "Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" He answered, "No." So they said to him, "Who are you? We need an answer for those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?" John replied in the words of Isaiah the prophet, "I am a voice of one calling in the wilderness, make straight the way for the Lord." Then the Pharisees who had been sent asked him, "Why then do you baptize if you are not the Christ, nor Elijah, nor the prophet?" "I baptize with water," John replied, "but among you stands one you do not know. He is the one who comes after me, the straps of whose sandals I am not worthy to untie." All this happened in Bethany, beyond the Jordan, where John was baptizing.
So he's talking about John the Baptist. And I got to say, Mary's cell phone, a text just comes up that says that a Yale-trained doctor reveals why Christians get sick more. It's a weird world we live in. So John the Baptist, this John is recounting how the Pharisees, the leaders, sent out people to demand, because he's got this big following. He's out baptizing people, and they get nervous when a bunch of people start following someone other than them. And they say, "Well, give an account of yourself. Who are you? Who do you think you are?" And John could have refused. He could have just said, "I don't answer to you." But he didn't. He said, "I'm not the Christ. I'm not the Messiah." "Well, then, are you Elijah?" They had this idea that Elijah himself was going to come back. There is a thing that comes up that is an Elijah, because Elijah, El is Yah, means El is God. But what he did, the things that he did, there is this idea that there will be another like him. And that
And to this day, when conservative Jews meet for a holiday for several of them, they set a place for Elijah.
They set a place at the table for Elijah in case he just comes strolling in. They had this idea that Elijah himself would come back. And he says, "No, I'm not Elijah." "Well, are you the prophet?" And way back in Deuteronomy, Moses, they were talking about having someone to listen to. And he says, God's going to send a prophet and give you his words for you to follow. When I'm gone, basically, you're going to get this other one. And they do, but they don't recognize him. So they've been looking for a big deal prophet for thousands of years. And they never quit doing this stuff. "So are you the prophet?" And he said, "No." They said, "Well, give us something, because we got to have something to take back to the leaders who sent us. What gives you the right to be out here doing this stuff?" And he quotes Isaiah, and that is well understood to be a messianic prophecy, that there would be one who goes along in front of Mashiach. And he says, "A voice crying in the wilderness, make straight the way for the Lord." And he says, "That's me. That's what I'm doing right here, right now. And there's already one among you whose sandals I'm not even fit to unlatch. He's already here. He's already among you, and you just won't see it. But my job is just to make straight, to prepare people in repentance, to get them ready to receive the Messiah that's coming. I think I've told most of you before that almost half of what's in the New Testament is either quotes or direct references to the Old Testament. It's pretty uncanny. People want to throw the Old Testament away. But here he is going to the prophecy that Isaiah made, that before Mashiach, before the Messiah comes, there will be this one voice crying in the wilderness to make sure. And that's John. He says, that's me.
I find it ironic that the word prophet, we know what the definition of prophet is. It was the same in the Old Testament. And he's quoting now Isaiah, prophet, recognized prophet in the Old Testament. But the people just sort of missed it. They're not listening to what he's saying. And he's not the only one, right? There's several prophet Moses about it, and nobody listened or missed the meaning of Mashiach.
Jerusalem is known as a killer of prophets. Jesus talks about it. The fact that these people were sent from God to give them a word, maybe correction, but to tell them, and they not only ignored it, they killed them. They killed other prophets, and he knew that's what he was going to. But yes, that is the story, Gene, is that they had prophets sent to them, and they just ignored it. And that's where he says, in the first part of this, that Jesus first came to his own, and they didn't receive him. It's the same old story.
I'm at verse 29, and this, you will see this throughout John. He has these parentheticals at the beginning that often do things like the next day. And for me, I always want to know the time thing, I'm like, so it was the next 24 hours. And that is not how John has written this book. First of all, John wrote this book, 70 or 50 years later or something, 50 years later, and it's not like Luke. It's not this interview of people. He was there, and he's letting you know things that happen, but the next day, don't get caught up in the next day. Did I do that good?
You've grown.
And because, and they do this when we get to like even the Last Supper, they say John makes you realize it really wasn't a Passover meal because his timing doesn't work. John didn't write it like a chronological travel guide, you guys. He just didn't.
You see what his purpose is, and he's laying things out for you that make it easy for you and everyone else, to make it easy to see. He goes, look, I saw this stuff with my own eyes. So I'm going to tell you the first story, and then the next one that I want to tell you about that sort of ties in with this. And where it says the day, let me just remind you that since we're saying that, or some people say this is a parallel to Genesis, that when it says on the second day, he created, all of this stuff, the idea that that's 24 hours is kind of silly. Okay, could it be? Fine if it needs to be, but we tend to define everything in terms of us. And so when we say that on the second day, well, it must relate to me and my concept of what a day is. And when John says it's the next day, it just means here's the next big chapter in this.
So verse 29, the next day John saw Jesus coming towards him and said, look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. This is of whom I said, a man who comes after me, who surpassed me because he was before me. I myself did not know him, but the reason I came baptizing with water was that he might be revealed to Israel. Then John testifies, I saw the Spirit descending from heaven like a dove and resting on him. I myself did not know him, but the one who sent me to baptize with water told me, the man on whom you see the Spirit descend and rest is he who will baptize with the Holy Spirit. I have seen and testified that this is the Son of God.
So here, John is giving this account of John the Baptizer. He's out in the wilderness and he's baptizing people. And you notice, though, back what we just read, that the Pharisees said, well, if you're not the Messiah and you're not the prophet and you're not Elijah, what are you doing baptizing people? So they placed significance on this baptism because they were offended that he was doing this without the proper authority. But John, the disciple John, says that there was a point where Jesus is coming and that John the Baptizer calls out, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." And he says that John told this story to his followers that Jesus came, and he says, "I didn't recognize him. It's not like I'm here to make straight the way for the Messiah. But God had to reveal him to me. I didn't have this instant recognition. That's who he is." He said, the one that comes and you see the Spirit descend, that's the one. And John the Baptizer is, I guess you would say, humble enough not to call attention to himself, not to say, and as the moment I saw him, I knew who he was. Instead, he says, I didn't know. God revealed him to me. And I'm here, I was there doing that, so that by baptizing, eventually, he would be revealed to all of you. It's kind of
And people get hooked up on the idea of, well, we know that John the Baptist and Jesus were related cousins or whatever, and Mary visited Elizabeth, and they were all some big happy family. And here it says, it's all confusing, that John didn't know Jesus. He just didn't know Jesus was the Messiah.
Right. He didn't know him. They had some family connection, but John is not going to try to say, well, it must be him, because all this stuff. John just waited until God revealed it to him. And we're told that. He waited until God revealed it, and he said, okay, this is the one.
See, but I read Anne pregnant, Mary pregnant, and at the sound, the fetus
Yeah.
moved.
Yep.
That's God at a whole different level. There's no voice, there's no nothing. So he was revealed, but not in person, like I did not know him in that spiritual sense, in this committed sense that God now has to put a dove on the shoulder and said, God revealed, that's the man, that's the one.
One of the sayings that I love is the one that says, "Oh God, I believe, help thou my unbelief." That's us. I mean, we believe, and then we have this part of us that doesn't. They clearly must have known that there was something very special. But John the Baptist, being who he is, doesn't jump to any conclusions until God reveals it to him. And he says he'd had that revelation from God that says, the one, when you're doing this baptizing, you're here to point the way to the Messiah. When you're doing all this baptizing, the one where you see the Spirit descend on him, that's the one. And John just waits. He just says, I didn't know for sure that he's Messiah until God revealed him to me. And then he's out telling everyone he sees Jesus coming, and he tells them, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. This is what John is, he's laying out everything for us so that we will believe.
The next day, John was there again. So it says the next day again. Don't get caught up in that. The next day, John was there again with two of his disciples. When he saw Jesus walking by, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." And when the two disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Jesus turned and saw them following. "What do you want?" he asked. They said to him, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" "Come and see," he replied. So they went and saw where he was staying and spent that day with him. It was about the 10th hour. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard John's testimony and followed Jesus. He first found his brother Simon and told him, "We have found the Messiah," which is translated as Christ. And Andrew brought him to Jesus, who looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which is translated as Peter. It is believed that the other disciple that was with him was probably John. So
John doesn't like to give his own name. He's,
So remember, now we know that of the 12 disciples, 12 of them were fishermen. So James and John knew.
12 of them were fishermen?
No, I'm sorry, 4 of them were fishermen. James and John knew Andrew and Peter. So Andrew and John were following
John the Baptist.
the John the Baptist. Andrew goes and gets Simon Peter's brother, gets Peter, and he ends up following.
Yeah, they're out there in the wilderness. They recognize the power that's in this John the Baptist, the baptizer, and they're followers, and they're out there, and they know the Messiah. John has told them, the Messiah is coming. And then John says, "Behold, the Lamb," and he says, "This is the one." And these two guys just break and follow him. And as soon as they've had, a day that he spent with him, Andrew goes off and gets his brother, and he's excited. He says he's here. I mean, John's identified him. He's here, and we went and talked to him. This is the one. We found him. This is the very beginning of this. But they leave John the Baptist and begin to follow Jesus.
The next day, Jesus decided to set out for Galilee, finding Philip. He told him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the same town as Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and told him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, the one the prophets foretold, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Nathanael asked. "Come and see," said Philip. When Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said to him, "Here is a true Israelite in whom there is no deceit." "How do you know me?" Nathanael asked. Jesus replied, "Before Philip called you, I saw you under the fig tree." "Rabbi," Nathanael answered, "you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus said to him, "Do you believe just because I told you I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." Then he declared, "Truly, truly, I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man."
And so here once again is John telling this story that the time has come, and John the Baptist has pointed the way to him and identified him, and this thing begins. And who is it that went to go get Nathanael?
Philip.
Philip went to go get Nathanael. So these people are beginning to follow, and he says, you gotta see this guy. This is the one. He says his name is Jesus. He's from Nazareth, and this is almost humorous because people have this saying, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" I mean, Nathanael just says, "No, I don't think so." And if I name any little town, I'm going to offend somebody. I always, I grew up near Cuero, and I would say, well, it's like saying he's from Cuero. There's nothing wrong with Cuero. But the point is, Nazareth is sort of a backwater little place. And they, for some reason, have a reputation of being a little shifty and worthless. And I've tried to find the history, and I couldn't, but it's true that's. And so he says, no, the Messiah is not coming from Nazareth. If he was born in Nazareth, and I love what he's told by Philip, come see for yourself. This concept within Jewish law of a witness and the power of someone who's seen something with their own eyes. And he tells him, I've talked to him, come and see for yourself. And he goes to Jesus, and Jesus says, here's an Israelite that is, doesn't mess around. He's full of truth and everything. Oh, and it's time. And he said, you think you know me? He says, man, I saw you sitting under the fig tree before Philip even came and talked to you. And he knows that's where he was. He understands. And he says, oh my gosh, I mean, if you could see that. And then you have this other, it may not be humor, but Jesus is saying, really? Really? You believe because I knew you were sitting under a fig tree? Just hold on. You're going to see a lot bigger stuff than that. Don't, if you think that's something, stick around. And of course he does, and the other ones do. But here's John relating these stories that he knows firsthand. John is a witness, and he's telling us, and he's telling everyone else who comes across this is the beginning, and it happened just like it was supposed to, and it happened just like people have told you.
And we are at the end, and 2 weeks from now, when we start at the wedding of Cana, I am going to do one more pitch for a series called The Chosen. And The Chosen is two seasons have been done. They're filming the third season. It is the most amazing series about a Christian series that
It
I've
is
seen.
far and away the best religious, scriptural thing I've ever seen. It's one of the best series I've ever seen, though, of any kind. I mean, I love it. And each time you watch one, they leave you really wanting to see the next one.
I always said I wanted to binge watch The Chosen, and we knew how the story turns out. But in the next couple of weeks, if you have a chance, you can get it free on the, what is it, the
BYU, Brigham Young.
Young
Yeah, if you have
station,
yeah.
or you can buy them on Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever. And the reason I'm bringing it up now, the second one in the series is The Wedding at Cana. And if any of you guys have a chance to watch season 1, session 1 and 2, the show number 2 is on the Wedding of Cana, and it's just fabulous.
I always look at this stuff and I just want to pull my hair out because they have their own agendas. This thing is so well done. I just can't. It is wonderful. And it shows when Nathaniel is called, when he's sitting out there, and he's under this fig tree and why. And it's just beautifully done. So
That's it.
Is that it? Mm-hmm. God, we don't always understand how things work. You know that. We're limited. And yet we see these things that we do understand. And they really help explain other things that we don't. And that, I know, is the beauty that you inspired words and you left things behind for us that give us the confidence and the comfort that we need with our limited abilities. And we're grateful for that. We are so thankful. We're thankful for the presence that we feel, that we see around us. These ones we prayed for this morning, God, are not just words. We really ask for your presence and your hand. And for those that are grieving, for the peace that comes that can't come any other way. Be with us this week as we go out. We know there's a place for us, an increasing place. Just help us remember. Amen.
Okay, you can unmute yourself. Let's see.
We're unmuted. There you go.
There you go. I hope you guys all have a good week. There, Cheryl put her camera on again.
A little bit sweaty. I've dried up.
Oh, Jack and Laura are not going to be here next weekend because Jack is retiring, but they will be here the week after. So they will be here the 29th, I think.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
y'all will not be here next weekend, or y'all will not be here the weekend after.
See, I told you, we
Exactly.
will be here on
Yeah.
the 22nd. We will not be here next weekend, the 22nd. We will be back for the 29th. And
Okay.
I'm going to record something for ahead of time for the 22nd, but we're going to be gone.
That's right.
Okay.
Have a wonderful trip.
Yeah, have a great
Happy
trip.
birthday, Mary.
Thank you.
Birthday. Oh, what a birthday trip.
Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Y'all too.
Bye-bye. Oh, my goodness.